Yo, family, what it do? Chicken stew, man. Copper Color King, we back in this bad boy with some more good content. Some more fire for that soul. Going back into South Carolina today, ladies and gents. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Click that notification bell to stay up to date on all content. And like I always say, man, stay plugged in like an extension cord. All my South Carolinians, tap in, man. We praying for South Carolina right now. Some pretty wicked wildfires happening out there right now. Pretty wicked wildfires happening. And it's like, wow. Like, first thing I said to myself is crazy, because I wanted to go there real soon to visit these African villages and to get a taste of the history that they got down there. And just as I was getting ready to organize that whole situation, here come these wildfires. It's like they know what we trying to figure out. They know we trying to get to the core of this stuff, of these things, man. So they trying to hinder your boy. They trying to hold me back, right? But it's alright, cause either way, you know, we got many different angles to come at this stuff from. Like this history of South Carolina stuff. Like it was a lot going on. It was a lot going on out there. Where I taught y'all in the last one, and for those who already knew, a lot of people already know. I appreciate those wholeheartedly. For the people that know and understand the truth. But there's a lot of folks who don't know. Right? And in addition to the copper color Indians we got down there, we also had many different groups of settlers who came straight from Europe and found new homes here in America. Some of these people eventually occupying land, you know, having some slaves. It all started with Barbados. And as we learn about the Huguenot migration into America, we're going to learn that these settlers came straight from France, Europe, went to Barbados, enslaved a couple folks over there, and then those slaves, along with the slave owners, traveled to South Carolina. Right? It's so much that we could connect, right? We covered a lot of that stuff in the last one. I showed y'all how they were transporting slaves out of South Carolina into Barbados, and out of Barbados into South Carolina. Now, covering that stuff, we gain a bigger understanding of the Indian slave trade, how many different peoples were going in and out, and the biggest one, most of all, the skin complexions of these people. We learned that they were of a deep chestnut complexion, swarthy, brown skin, a darker skin tone, darker than me, that's for sure. And then we also had these groups of Europeans who were also colored, swarthy, tawny. You know, they had some color. They came over here to America. And without a doubt, even some of these people, their descendants being slaves in this whole slave plantation scheme that we had going on here in America. Right? Some being slave owners passing for white, some being slaves seen as black due to the admixture. You got black, swarthy Europeans mixing in with these deep chestnut complexion Indians. So of course you'll get a darker skinned person. Right, but I ain't gonna continue to chat, man. Like I said, like, comment, and subscribe. We finna go crazy in this one, man. We're gonna talk about the Huguenot migration into America, specifically into South Carolina, who these Huguenot peoples are, and the complexions of these folks as well. Right, we're gonna try to make this one nice and brief. Let's get into it. Now, just to start off real quick, we're going to talk about the Huguenot history. Who are these people? Where did they come from? Why do they have the name Huguenot? Just why are these people so important overall? I've mentioned them plenty of times before. And I mentioned these people, I mentioned Huguenots to people who are like real religious and stuff today, and they don't have a clue on what a Huguenot is. And it's so crazy because I'd be like, wow, the same stuff you practice now till this day, it stems from these people, Protestants and whatnot. It stems from a Huguenot population, but they have no clue on who these people are, and that's what be blowing my mind sometimes. So then, how can you sit there and follow something that you have no knowledge of? We have the Huguenot ancestry, a lot of us, so this one is very important. So let's check it out. What does it say? So who were the Huguenots? The origin of the word is obscure, but it was the name given in the 16th century to the Protestants in France, particularly by their enemies, 1600s. The impact of the Protestant Reformation was felt through Europe in the early 16th century. Its greatest protagonists were the German Martin Luther, where MLK gets his name from, and the Frenchman Jean Calvin Baptiste. Not Baptiste, Calvinist. That's where the Calvinist comes from. In France, Calvinism penetrated all ranks of society, especially those of the literate craftsmen in the towns of the nobility. There were 8 civil wars in France between 1562 and 1598, and those are most known as the religion wars. The Charter of Edward, if I'm not mistaken, that's the 6th or the 4th. That's the 6th. Sorry. Enabled the first French Protestant church to be set up in England. Descended from this church is the one in Soho Square in London. In 1598, the Protestant Henry de Bourbon, King of Navarre, inherited the French throne after the deaths of his 3 Valois cousins, sons of Catherine de Medici. The Civil War continued, so in 1593, the spirit of Paris is worth a mass. Henry converted to Catholicism. 5 years later, the Civil Wars ended and Henry issued the Edict of Nantes, this is extremely important, which gave the Huguenots, his former co-religionists and comrades in arms, considerable privileges, including widespread religious liberty. Over time, Huguenots became loyal subjects of the French crown. Why was this important? Well, because we learn that these Huguenots, these people, eventually they will end up being forced to convert to Catholicism. And with that came the migration to America. Now, the French were already making trips to America around the 1500s. So you had these Huguenots already coming to America and meeting up with the Indians, mixing in with the Indians around the same time when the Spanish and the Spanish were coming to America and pretty much doing the same exact thing. They were already planning to colonize at this time. Huguenots and all, these colored people, these French, and then we have the Scottish people, the Scottish folks, the colored Scottish folks who were coming over here fleeing from Cromwell and whatnot. That's a different story, but yeah, these Huguenots coming to America, mixing in with the Indians. You get the term French Indian. These people, these Huguenots, being of Jewish or Sephardi Jew, Moorish Muslim, all the same thing, ancestry. Let's continue. However, their position became increasingly insecure as King Louis XIV, grandson of Henry IV, listened more and more to those who advised him that the existence of this sizable religious minority was a threat to the absolute authority of the monarch. Gradually, the Huguenots' privileges were eroded. In the 1680s, Protestants in certain parts of France were deliberately terrorized by the billeting of unruly troops in their homes, the Dragonnades. They were all supporting the crown, backed by Catholicism. Finally, in 1685, Louis revoked the Edict of Nantes, while exiling all Protestant pastors, at the same time forbidding the laity to leave France. They were exiled. They left. They were exiled. Some fleeing to Africa, right? More Spain. Some going to, North Africa or West Africa. Some also fleeing over here to the Americas. Right? To the considerable surprise of the government, many did leave, often at great risk to themselves. Men whom were caught, if not executed, were sent as galley slaves to the French fleet in the Mediterranean. Many who were caught, if not executed, were sent as galley slaves to the French fleet in the Mediterranean. Now, just to let people know, we covered these slave trips already. We covered this. I really can't go pull up the website now. I would have loved to have it already pulled up, but what did we learn? That a lot of these slave ships around this time were leaving from the islands near the Mediterranean, right? Let's just take a look at those. What Mediterranean islands do we have? I'm pretty sure, looking on a map, there's plenty. But we already know that they were picking folks up from the Mediterranean, shipping them to the west coast of Africa or to the Americas. Right? They were slaves. Let this sink in. We gotta let this sink in, because people want like to go on about this West African slave trade stuff or whatever the case may be. All right, granted, that stuff did happen. However, there was not an African slave at this time. At this time, they were already over there beefing with each other. Right, the different nations of that over there beefing with each other. In Europe, these Huguenots were enslaved. Where were the French traveling to, right? To the Americas. We learned that they made several trips in between 1600 and 1780 to the Americas. Several trips. And we're going to get into a lot of that as we continue throughout this video. I just wanted to make this one extremely notable, because these are the same slaves sent to the plantations here in the Americas or in the Caribbean islands. But let's continue. Or to other places in Africa. That's right, Egypt, West Africa, North Africa, many different places. They was going crazy with this stuff. Huguenots all over the place. And this is why that term 12 lost tribes is even more important, because look at how far people were being spread out. You got folks over here being enslaved, folks over there being enslaved, being sent all across the globe. Right? It'd be hard to track down someone's ancestry today using a DNA test. That's why I say that. How can you use a DNA test when we had all of this going on? A DNA test won't be able to describe to you all of this stuff that was going on. And we're not going to sit here and say that all of these slaves were white just because they were from Europe. No. That would be a huge lie. That would go against true history. Right? Look, the women were imprisoned and the children sent to convents. About 200,000 Huguenots left France, settling in non-Catholic Europe. The Netherlands, Germany, and especially Prussia, Switzerland, Scandinavia, and even as far as Russia, where Huguenot craftsmen could find customers at the court of the Tsars, the Khazars, the Tsars, Khazars, Could be the same, could be two different. I bunch it all under the same thing. But yeah, these Huguenots, expert salesmen, right? They could sell you the feather off a bird or lint out of a pocket, right? This is why we have all of those depictions of these colored people in the Netherlands, Germany, Prussia, Switzerland, right? These is where those Jews went. The Huguenots, the Sephardi, they migrated as far as north as there. They migrated to the Americas. They went all over. Right, check this. The Dutch East India Company sent a few hundred to the Cape to develop the vineyards in South Africa. About 50,000 came to England. Perhaps about 10,000 moving on to Ireland. Right? These Irish, aka Scottish, these black folks, yep, they're French Huguenots as well. Just because they're living in Ireland doesn't mean that they're technically Irish, right? They all the same people though. All the same people. They just moved around. People were moving around. So there are many inhabitants of these islands who have Huguenot blood in their veins. Whether or not they still bear one of the hundreds of French names of those who took refuge here, thus bringing the word refugee into the English language. This is where we get the term refugee, from the people who took refuge. Because of the political climate of the time and a Britain strongly suspicious of the aims of Louis XIV of France, and in fact about to begin a series of wars to curb those ambitions, the Huguenots were on the whole welcomed here. This map indicates the main routes used by the Huguenot refugees, the countries to which they went, and the numbers settling in each area. However, as the pamphlet literature of the time shows, they could not entirely escape the accusations leveled at immigrants from the time immemorial. That their presence threatened jobs, standards of housing, public order, morality, hygiene, and even that they ate strange foods. For at least half a century, the Huguenots remained a recognizable minority, making their presence felt in banking, commerce, industry, the book trade, the arts, the army, on the stage, and in teaching. Right? The Moors, what did they do? They taught everybody these things, man. Right? So why not be involved in these things still, right? The experts in this, they brought this stuff over here to America. They brought it with them to America. Although many retained their Calvinist organization and worship, treated more generously by government than homegrown nonconformity, by about 1760, they had ceased to stand out as foreign, even to follow in the path of Anglican conformity in religion, which some had taken the very beginning, right? Hiding under Christianity. Huguenots were also known as crypto Jews, crypto conversos, people pretty much hiding under a different banner because they weren't allowed to openly practice their religion. Right? All of these people bunched up in the same group. But as y'all guys see in the picture here, 10K came to America. Right? I predict the numbers to be way more than that. Definitely, especially considering the fact that we got French towns in America renamed after the towns in France. There's so many of them. Like, it's hard to keep count. And they were established by the migrating people who came over here to America. Right? I always bring up La Rochelle because that's one of them. New Rochelle is right here in New York, not too far from me. Right? And there's a lot of Huguenot references up there in New Rochelle. Right? An established colony established by colored people. So now that we got an understanding on who these Huguenots are, let's talk about some of their migrations, some of their trips, right? This is from the history of the Huguenot immigration to America. A book that I plan on really reading more into just to gain a better understanding of what was going on. But why I brought it to the channel today because, well, in this chapter, they talk about They're a colony that was established in South Carolina. And they also talk about the different families who migrated over here to South Carolina, these Huguenot families. And it also gives us a breakdown on what these people may have looked like. So let's check it out. We're going to start in chapter 4. I always get this wrong. Sorry, chapter 6. All right, let's check it out. The revocation. We're going to read through. I appreciate you guys, man. And I love those who support this channel. So let's see, what do they got to say? The flight from Saint-Tong and Poitou. The revocation. The province of Saint-Tong, now embraced in the department of Charente Inferior, presents a coastline exceedingly broken. The low sandy shore is everywhere indented by bays, outlets of devious rivers, as the Charente and the Sudre of inlets of the sea, which runs capriciously far back into the land, making irregular peninsulas and spreading out into broad marshes. Peopled by a simple and hardy race of sailors, fishermen, and salters, this region we have already seen was early visited by earnest propagators of the Reformed doctrines, and a large part of the population was won over to Protestantism. Right, these Huguenots protesting against the crown, against Catholicism. At the time of the revocation, Saint-Tong lost many of its most industrious and virtuous families. The facilities for their escape were exceptionally great. The harbors and landing places along the Atlantic coast on the west and up the broad Gulf of the Grenadine on the south were just so many open doors, inviting the persecuted to seek their freedom. The persecuted, right? Like I said, they was fleeing the crown. Isabel and Ferdinand running away. What did they tell us here? Also, right, King Louis the 14th and the stuff they had going on. King Louis. They were fleeing, running away, leaving, escaping, right? Prosecution, Jews being prosecuted. Same stuff we basically seen in Nazi Germany, right? These people were being prosecuted and they were running away for freedom. Nor could the mounted guards stationed at intervals along the coast, however they might hurry from port to port and scan the sands and shallows to detect some fugitive, prevent many from succeeding in the attempt. Near the mouth of the Charente, on the neck of the land formed by that of the Tortoise Stream, as it approaches the sea, there were several villages and hamlets where a number of our Huguenot families originated. One of them, Port des Barques, has disappeared entirely from the map and the Gazetteer. 3 others, Saint Frolot, Moise, and Sebois, are obscure and decaying places of 400, 500, and 600 inhabitants. Saint Nazaire alone, with a population of some 1,400 souls, shows any degree of vitality. They were fleeing towns, leaving them abandoned. Port des Barques, opposite of the island of Orléans, was the early home of Elie Dupuis, or Dupuis, Francois Bourdon, Daniel Targy, and others who came to America. Most of these refugees effected their escape to England as early as the year 1681. As early as 1681. What did they tell us? Right, as far as the 1600s goes, the Protestants in certain parts of France, they were being terrorized by troops in their own homes, people kicking doors. The Edict of Nantes, which ensured that these Huguenots would walk freely throughout France and practice their religion openly, was revoked. It was time to go for these people, right? They were being forced to get down or lay down. right? And like they told us though, and we can't forget, some were sold into slavery. These ships were coming over here either way, because you already had people promising to establish new territory in here to build wealth for their families. And then you had those who were coming over here on behalf of the crown and King Louis. Right? It's like basically with the American Revolution. Those who side with the crown and those who were quote unquote true Americans. The true Americans were the ones who came there to establish stuff for their families for generations, because they were fleeing their own type of oppression. This is why this stuff is so weird, because they come over here and then you get slaves. They own slaves. We don't know the true history of slaves. All we do is learn the negative aspects to it. We don't know that slaves were also servants, indentured servants. Slaves were also people who were working for their masters. It was just a whole lot, and it'll leave it for the reader or for someone who is researching these things to be fairly confused. But this is why we have to gain an understanding of the who, what's, the whens and wheres and the whys. Because it is extremely, extremely, extremely important. So yeah, like I said, they were being terrorized. Folks was kicking in their doors, just telling them they got to go. There's no more room for you here, right? And also with that, you can't practice your religion openly. You either have to conform to our rules and our government, or we're gonna prosecute you and kill you, put you in the guillotine and whatnot. Going crazy. So let's continue. So we understand that now. Like, they was kicking doors and stuff. Folks was escaping to England as early as 1681. The name Eli Depew appears 10 years later among the names of settlers of New Oxford, Massachusetts. How did they get there? They got there from Great Britain, right? Great Britain sailed to Massachusetts. Great Britain, Massachusetts is a British colony. That's a British colony. So you had these Huguenots sailing here to America with the Brits. And still probably coming as indentured servants. Right, we're going to learn a little bit more about that. Let's see. Francois Bourdon came to Boston and was an elder of the French church in that city. By the end of the century, his son Francois, while the family were still in England, went back in 1684 to Port-au-Bois, perhaps hoping to secure some of the property left there at the time of their flight. Word was sent to Paris of his return to the place. Daniel Target, ship carpenter, another of these fugitives, settled in Rhode Island, where the name slightly changes to Torgy, has been preserved and has lately become conspicuous in American literature. Jacques Billybeau of Port-au-Bois came to view afterward as one of the inhabitants of Mannequin Town, Virginia, and Charles Farquhar and his wife Anne Huguenot with their children sought refuge in South Carolina. So they were going to all these different states in America, finding landfall in all of these different states. And you had some who were coming straight here to America. Those who went to Britain, they found their passageway here by whatever situation that was going on over there. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to learn about that real soon. We're going to learn about that real soon. Anybody got anything to say about that? Drop that in the comments below. Right, but all of these different families of Huguenot ancestry finding their way to America, specifically in the places where the first colonies were established. Right, and they were coming over here as servants, or just as poor people trying to make homes in new land. Like, because let's understand, they were seeking refuge. Refuge meaning you got to drop everything you got and go. So they didn't come from wealth. I mean, they didn't come with wealth. They probably came from wealth, but they didn't come with wealth, which means they had to find their wealth or establish new wealth in their new homes in America. From the village of Saint Nazaire, several families of Huguenot seamen made their escape about the same time. Jean Martin, Francois Boquet, Pierre Tillou, Jean Hain, Jean Huguenot came to New York, and Mathurin Gorin with his sons Francois settled in South Carolina. Sabois anciently fortified a town and the capital of small principality, gave its name to the noble house of Sabois, which was one of the last to abandon the Protestant cause. Here Pierre Poinsett, one of the immigrants to South Carolina, Jean Penthier of Virginia, Jean Doblet, and Jean Perriot of New York, and others were born. Jean. I'm butchering the name. Jean Perriot. All of these families, though, coming to America, sliding. Right? These are Huguenots. Within the limits of the principality, and scarcely more than a mile to the southwest of Sabois, is the hamlet of Moise, the birthplace of Pierre Guimard and of Elinor, the brave confessor who suffered for the faith in the galleys of Louis XIV. He was in jail. Right? They had him in the galleys. They had him in jail. Oh, okay, sorry, a ship. That's a ship. I'm thinking that's jail. Oops. Gulag, galley, same thing. But they had him on the ships. They say he suffered for the faith. Suffered for the faith. It's crazy, right? These people were suffering. And survived a long imprisonment. Yep, it was jail. To become the patient teacher of Negro slaves and Indians in the city of New York. No, the galleys. He was on the ships for a long time. And he was the teacher of Negroes and Indians in New York. Right, okay. Let's be mindful, though. They coming straight to the Americas. So these Negroes that they talking about, we already know they talking about the tribesmen, them. You got other Negroes educating other Negroes on how to be civilized. Very, very weird. It's weird because it's like the people here in America were already like on a whole different type of time. And how I look at it is like if people at this time were just open-minded enough to understand that we could have cultivated possibly the greatest country on earth had we truly worked together, then that would add a whole new meaning to black people stick together. Seriously. You got other Negroes teaching other Negroes how to be civilized. That's crazy. The descendants of Pierre Guimard in Ulster County, New York, have preserved the certificate which their ancestor brought with him from the consistory of the Protestant Church of Moise, attesting his good character. Louis Geniel, Jos, and Daniel Mercier, members of the French Church in New York, had also fled from Moise. They doubtless knew something of the stress of the persecution that visited the inoffensive population of these obscure places. The curate of Sabois was wont to boast that he waged perpetual war on the Huguenots, who dared not to say one word. "They are taken like fat peasants by the beak," said he, "and at the slightest sound off, we packed them to the prisons at Rochefort." This is how they were treating the Huguenots. This is how they was treating folks. Sending them to prison because of what they chose to believe in. right? Sending them to camps, forcing them to work, making them slaves. Like I told y'all, these people, they were Israelites, Moors, Sephardi, and this is how they were being treated in France at the time. Because of that whole, you know, you gonna get down and lay down ideal that these egotistical, power wielding people, so to say, we're gonna say people, had in Europe, right? Saint Fro, between Moise and Saint Nazaire, contains barely 400 inhabitants. Here, Pierre Durand, Jean Dragaud, and Jeanne Dutay, wife of Jacques Target, refugees in New York, lived before their flight from France. So many people, they coming from France, they slaughtered. South of this cluster of villages, upon another marshy delta, stand the villages of Hares and the seaport town of Marines. Jean Chadien, shipmaster, fled from Hares in 1682 with his family to Cork in Ireland, right? This is where, again, like I said, this is where you have also these Irish and Scottish people coming to the Americas. They were not Irish, right? They may have been in Ireland for some time, married an Irish woman or male, names changed and stuff like that, but their ancestry remains Huguenot. They remain French Huguenots. And it's like this for most people who have that blood over there, because of them spreading out and going all over the place and migrating to different places in Europe. This man also made his way to New York. And this is also funny because Central Park has Indian and Irish history, right? The story of Seneca Village, peopled by Indians and Irish folks, right? But these Irish folks, they weren't entirely Irish. They were Huguenots. They were mostly poor Irish immigrants, and they came at different periods of time. We got the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1600s. But it happened throughout time, and it happened around the time when Central Park was known as Seneca Village. This one is not really giving us what we're looking for, but y'all know where we're going. If you know the history of Seneca Village, then you know. Right, they had Irish immigrants there, quote unquote, these African Americans, these Indians, right? They peopled Central Park at the time, and it was over a period of time. But this land been belonging to colored people, right? These same Huguenots that fled to Ireland, they eventually made their way here to New York. And they they started populating places like New Rochelle, Central Park being one of them, and many of the other colonies, right? We'll have to do some research to find out which ones, but I'm pretty sure we're going to learn a little bit more, right? You see, it says right here, his children, they settled on Staten Island and in New Rochelle. Elie Rembert, Seaman, and Jacques Rembert Salter fled from Hares in 1683. Elie and Jacques found homes in America, the one in New York and the other in New Rochelle. Pierre Russelin, sailmaker of Hares, escaped with his family in 1682, and after a sojourn of some years in England, came to New York. Pierre Andrenou, mate accompanied by Chandine to Ireland. He was probably the father of Jacques Andrenou of New York. The flight of these seafaring men and their families was caused by the measures taken as early as the year 1680 for the purpose of forcing all the sailors and captains of vessels to accept the king's religion. Right? So they can accept the king's religion. And what was the king's religion? The king's religion was Catholicism. And like I said, they were adopting this get down or lay down philosophy. Like, you're gonna get down or lay down. You gonna rock with us or you not gonna rock with us, right? One thing's for sure though, if you choose not to rock with us, then we're gonna show you why you gotta rock with us. We're gonna put you in your place. And that was their mind state. That's how they viewed the situation. And that's why so many different families left and came here to America. So if one was to say America was populated by enslaved Africans, that would be a lie. Because from the start of the entire peopling of people not from America, it all started with people from Europe escaping their own oppression, escaping their own form of slavery. Right? Slavery was happening all over the globe, assumingly at this time. Right? At this time, it had to be. But this just means that the first people who peopled America outside of the people who already belonged and lived here were escaping their own form of oppression. Were escaping their own form of slavery. This completely goes against what they tell us about their quote unquote true history and the African slave trade. Because for the African slave trade to work out, that means every boat that came left from Europe had to stop in Africa. And this right here alone is telling us that that's not true. Right? A lot of these boats that came over here were families escaping from the other side. Let's learn some more what they're gonna tell us. Right? They didn't want to practice the king's religion. Right? They were being forced to get down and lay down. That Catholicism stuff, man, I tell y'all, that stuff is crazy. Y'all do better, you'll do better. In April of that year, a circular was sent to the warden of every port in the kingdom, informing him that His Majesty was resolved, little by little, to remove from the navy all those of the pretended reformed religion. An able ecclesiastic would be sent to each port, and upon his arrival they were to be made very gently to understand that His Majesty was willing to bear for a while with them to see whether they would profit by the facilities given them for obtaining instruction in the Catholic faith. But if they should fail, he would dispense with their services. Peep how they put the quotations around them very gently. Right? And it's so funny because this same form of oppression trickled down into the Americas, because the slave master in America struck the slave and pretty much utilized the quote unquote fear of God. They beat the fear of God into the slave. Because while they doing all of this, they making the claim that they're doing it for their God. Right? So it's the same stuff, essentially. It's the same stuff. It trickled over into the Americas, and it was brought over here by the same people. Because another thing we got to understand is that when these families were coming here, like I said, it's not like they came to the Americas and was like, nope, let's enslave the Indians. That's only something that was happening with the people who were being sent over here on these voyages, being instructed to enslave Indians. Most of these folks got here and was like, you know what? My wife back home, I'm about to start a family. No cap. If I'm lying, I'm dying. All right, but let's continue. Upon receiving these orders, the Count d'Estrees, in command at La Rochelle, wrote to the minister, "You confirm me, sir, in the resolution which I had formed to devote myself earnestly, during this season, to the conversion of sailors. It must be borne in mind that these pious efforts were put forth, not as one might imagine, for the moral and spiritual good of seamen, a class greatly needing such philanthropic attention, but for the purpose of either driving from the country or forcing into a nominal and hypocritical consent to the established religion." Right? Either forcing them from the country or forcing them, right, to, like I said, get down or lay down. They forced them to consent to following that religion. Those who, as their superiors freely acknowledged, formed the soundest and best part of the seafaring population of France. Marines, 25 miles of La Rochelle, is now a town of 4,000 or 5,000 inhabitants. It is now surrounded by salt marshes, which in former times so insulated this place as well as the neighboring town of Arvert, that they were known as islands. This region at the time of the revocation was almost entirely Protestant, right? The entire La Rochelle in France was Protestant. The Temple of Marines was still standing in 1684 when all the Huguenot places of worship in the neighborhood had been destroyed. They destroyed all of the mosques and the synagogues and replaced them with Catholic churches. They do the same stuff everywhere, man. Right? And this is why none of the history could be traced, because they destroy it, burn the books, put it in museums, change the names, call it what it's not. They telling us right here that they pretty much redid the area. Because if you look at it now, none of these Huguenot places of worship, mosques and synagogues would still be existing. Right? It's probably nothing but churches all in up and down. Right? Let's just see. Catholic churches all over. There go La Rochelle, right there. All these Catholic churches. I'm just saying though. You know what I mean? 13 or 14,000 persons now gathered from far and near to attend its services. The order for its demolition was at length given. To aggravate the distress which this order would produce, it was withheld from the knowledge of the ministers until Saturday night. The next morning, about 10,000 persons were assembled around the church. Many of them had come from the Isles of Ré and Orléans. 23 children had been brought for baptism. Upon learning the doom of their sanctuary, the multitude dispersed slowly, weeping, many of them unable to restrain themselves from sobs and lamentations. Relatives and friends embraced one another in silent grief. Many, with hands clasped and eyes turned towards heaven, seemed unable to tear themselves away from the spot where, in spite of the inclemency of the weather, they had come to seek comfort in God's word and in prayer. Several of the little children died on the homeward journey. The order for the destruction of the temple required, as usual, that the Huguenots themselves should be made to demolish it. Going crazy, they forced the people to destroy their own temple. right? But the government found it impossible to carry out this design, and it was found necessary to bring workmen from a considerable distance to execute the decree. And here they talk about new people, the more families who came to the Americas. Check this. A new number of the Huguenot inhabitants of Marines came to America. Among these were Pierre Parcot and Francois Gendron, his wife who settled in New Rochelle, Ellie Charon, Francois Bassett, Du Bois, and Dr. Pierre Bassett of Boston, and Andre Palliet and Timothy Archbamu, Pierre Trocon, Benjamin and Elie Tourneau of New York, Jean Bossiou, and Pierre Demion of South Carolina. More Huguenot families in South Carolina. All right, and I don't want to keep going through that because it's going to give too much. This is the last part we're going to read right here. So it's the last part, right? But it says, the tongue of the land south of the Marines, formed by the estuaries of the Cedure and the Garonne, was covered with villages, the inhabitants of which, principally mariners, were nearly all Protestants before the Revocation. At La Tremblade, near the mouth of the Cedure, only 5 of 6 families professed the Roman Catholic faith. When, in 168 or 1681, the temple of the Huguenots was taken and converted into a Roman Catholic church. And the following year, they demolished another temple. But they took a temple and they converted it to a Roman Catholic church right there, right in front of our face. So yeah, that's what they did to these Jews out there. You know, they destroyed their stuff, enslaved them, sent them to jail, forced them to take on their religion, and these people was just like, you know what, screw it, we're out of here. And they dipped. A lot of them dipped and they found new homes. Check this. Let's read the footnotes. Y'all think it's a game? Watch this. Inventory of the goods of Madame Blanche Sauzou, widow of Mr. Jacques Du Bois, made by Jean Papin and Jean Boutillier. The property included one. Ooh, we skipping some footnotes. One piece of land of about 120 acres situated at New Rochelle, and this governed upon ye great lots coast, valued at 30 pounds. And one young Negro by name Sans Façons, valued with other chattels at 40 pounds, totaled at 882 pounds. Or whatever this symbol may be. I'm not too fond of it. Oh yeah, whatever that symbol may be. Y'all could correct me if I'm wrong though. Pounds. That's what we're gonna go with. But yeah, we had young Negro Huguenots being given in these lands. I mean, traveling with the families to these lands. Right? Coming from France. So again, like I said, we learning these Huguenots, what they were escaping, what was going on, and you know, the new homes they were finding here in America. We got more. We have another one, an entire family. It says, leaving the sea coast of Saint-Yon, we find in several of the inland towns and villages of this populous province the localities from which other Huguenot households were driven by persecution to our American shores. And Saint Jean d'Angely, formerly one of the most important strongholds of the Protestants of France, the temple of the Reformed congregation was closed in the year 1683. Jean Tartarian, ain't that so funny? Tartarian Afterwards, an elder of the French church in Boston came from this place, and 3 of the Huguenot families that sought refuge in South Carolina. The families of Daniel Dozius, Elie Bisset, and Jean Thomas were likewise from Saint Jean d'Angely. Jean Faget, one of the chefs de famille of the French church in New York, was a native of Marmarbou. Chalice was the birthplace of Jacques Nicolas. Dit Petit Bois, one of the French refugees in South Carolina. Just beyond the eastern boundary of Saint-Yon in the neighboring province of Angoumois was Barbezieux, the home of Paul Drillouet, one of the most prominent and estimable members of the French colony in the city of New York. We had multiple families, though, coming to South Carolina. Multiple Huguenot families. Multiple finding refuge in South Carolina. Right? They are refugees. Okay, just to be like extremely adamant on that. Refugees are people who flee due to persecution, war, violence, or serious public disorder, cannot return to their home country because of the danger they face, and they seek safety in another country. When refugees travel, they don't travel heavy. They don't bring a bag with them, a full wallet, a wad of cash, or anything that represented their source of value. You cannot travel with all of these things. You have to pick up and go. Right? We're reading, you understand that, they kicking doors, they forcing people to get down and lay down, guns being drawn or whatever, not even guns, whatever, muskets being drawn. Like, people are really being persecuted. So they're coming over here. These people are the same poor people that lived in the lowlands of South Carolina, who were mixing in with the Indians. They were mixing in with the Indians. Right? These are the people who lived in the swamps and whatnot, and the islands that's near South Carolina. They were mixing in with the Indians. Right? And it's so real because this is why we have a term that I'm going to mention once we continue going through the video, but it's called brass ankles. Brass ankles. Right? They black people who could pass for white. They're clearly Negro. I don't know what was up with him. They did my boy bad. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, he might as well have just been bald. But yeah, these people are Negroes, right? You would call her a Negro to this day. You would see her outside with Malcolm X and them, getting busy, marching. Right? The brass ankle people, they were mixing in though. Right, mixing in straight. Right, these families, they were finding refuge in the Americas. Refuge. So it's a little different. Right, they weren't voyaging and just moving, with their families to come over here and pillage land and whatnot. They were escaping. This is why many of the tribes, when they first encountered a lot of these colonizers, they did it with open arms because they encountered some of these people prior. And the ones they encountered before weren't as aggressive as the new ones that they encountered now. Right? Or not now, after. Right? You had some people who came, like, for example, with the Spanish before DeSoto, after DeSoto, and with DeSoto. Some who they got there. It's a story where DeSoto, when he got to Florida, he met with an Indian who knew the Spanish language. And he became an interpreter. So they stumbled upon these people plenty of times. Right? Check this out. Let's see, where can we start? The town of Pons in Saint-Ouen was among the first to admit the preaching of the Reformed doctrines near the middle of the 16th century. It was held by the Huguenots during the Civil Wars and secured to them by the Edict of Nantes as one of their fortified places. Throughout the first half of the 17th century, the best families of the noblesse of Saint-Ouen attended the temple at Pons. On the eve of the revocation of that edict, Pons still contained a considerable number of Protestants. Elie Proliou was their pastor, and he remained with his flock through all of their tribulations until, on the 15th day of April, 1686, their temple was leveled with the ground. It was leveled. Their quote-unquote temple, right, their synagogue, while the work of destruction was in progress, Proliou preached to his weeping congregation from the words, "He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." Under the cruelties inflicted upon them, many yielded and signed the abjuration, which their persecutors, as well as they knew, to be only feigned. Some of these, with others who stood firm in their profession, embraced the earliest opportunity to escape from France. Who stood firm with their profession. Like they knew they were good because they had all of these mercantile skills. Right, these mercantile skills. They had the skills. They had the trades. They had the keys. Right, they could build wherever they go. They were eager to leave. And when they reached America, he became the first pastor of the Huguenot Church of Charleston, South Carolina. So Charleston, a Huguenot settlement. Right, Charleston is a Huguenot settlement. Look at that. The first church, the first pastor of the first church, the first Huguenot church, excuse me. Right, in Charleston. Right. He was an advocate and a judge in the town of Pons and a deacon of the Reformed church that place settled in New York, and was made freeman of the city in 1694. Jean Saracen Sieur de Frignac, another deacon of Proliou's congregation, followed him into Charleston. And look, so many of these Huguenot families coming into America. This is what I'm talking about. Check this. Right, this is going to let us know. So they talking about a specific Huguenot family here. They're going to give a brief description on what this person, what his skin complexion was like. Just listen to what they say. Right, they say, upon the death of Andrew in 1738, his fortune, the greatest of any in the place, went by will to his nephew Peter, the eldest son of Benjamin of New York. Peter Fanuel was a sagacious and energetic merchant. Right? Huguenots, merchants, get that bag, man. They get that bag. I'm telling you, it's like that with the most of them. They all had a skill, and this is how they was able to make it happen here in America or wherever they went. Right? No matter where they went, they was able to make it happen. Right? Intent upon gain, yet lavish in expenditure. His letter books, which have been preserved, give a graphic picture of the man of business and the high liver keenly looking after his pecuniary interests. At the same time, thoughtful of his wine cellar and of his kitchen, his handsome chariot with the family arms must have been the admiration of the town. Peter's exterior was not impressive. Of low stature and dropsical habit, His complexion was swarthy, and he had been lame from childhood. The hot temper which effervesces in his correspondence must have been found expression in speech and gesture as well, with little regard of personal dignity. He was of a swarthy complexion. Right? They talking about this French Huguenot, y'all. This ain't no African. Like, this is for your average brown-skinned Negro, your average light-skinned Negro, your average dark, like, it doesn't really matter. Like, we come in all different shades of wheat. It's just about understanding that our bloodline runs deeper than what we may think. And I say this based off this term swarthy in general, because you know how many black people, Negroes in America, could be classified as swarthy, so-called black. Right, what else? And then it tells us that there was a tawny complexion. A tawny complexion. And they give it to us on this page, where it states that there are not over 20 French families here in Boston, and they are diminishing in number every day because they go off into the country to buy or lease lands and attempt a settlement. Others are expected this spring from every quarter. 2 young men have just arrived from Carolina, who give some account of the country. In the first place, they say they have never before seen so miserable a country, nor an atmosphere so unhealthy. Fevers prevail all the time, from which those who are attacked seldom recover, and if some escape, their complexion becomes tawny, like that of the 2 who have arrived here, and who are pitiable to behold. Right? They say they are tawny. Right? Their complexion becomes tawny. They already tawny. Right? That's just letting us know right there. So understanding that is a part of that, is understanding, like, yes, right, we do have the blood of the Aboriginal, but these guys count as well too, right? We can't count them out. These were the folks who were mixing in with the tribes then. Right? This is a Huguenot. Right? And just like how the Indians were classified as deep chestnut complexion, right? These same folks, it's the same thing. They're giving us the same thing. Swarthy complexion, tawny complexion, all so-called black. Right? Let's continue. So what else I got for y'all? So here we learn a little bit about Stewartstown, South Carolina. This is a Huguenot Scottish settlement. And why is this one important? Right? Well, we learn a little bit about what was going on and how we got a lot of these different people over here, including the Scots, because the Scot and Irish involvement in South Carolina is really, really important to understand. So I should save this one for another one. Right? Moving forward, I want you guys to understand that we're going to throw this in here, right? We're going to throw this in because I'm going to save that one for another one. That's a real good one, and I really want to give a real deep dive of this entire chapter right here. So that's too much to actually go through for the remainder of this video. Right? I really wanted to just give y'all understanding of who these folks were and who was mixing in with the Indians at the time. Right? These settlements, right? These Huguenot settlements here in South Carolina were all on Indian land. And it's not like these tribes were not here at the time. They were here in 1684. They were here in 1562. The same tribes we covered, the Kiowa, the Kuso, right, the St. Helens tribes, they were all there. There was about 15, 16 tribes. They were all there. And we learned that they all banded, some banded together, and later on ended up forming the Kasubo, which was a name given to those people and not exactly accepted by the tribe within itself. Right, so look, yeah, we could go through this. Port Royal there was founded the year 1562. It's a Huguenot colony. Port Royal is a Huguenot colony. Right, a band of Huguenot settlers planted a small settlement of Stewartstown in 1684. Right there brooded dark memories of early colonial tragedies. Ooh, this one I told you I was gonna go crazy. You're gonna talk about Florida, the Caribbean islands. You're gonna go into a lot. I mean, one thing we can learn right here: the territory of Carolina was granted by King Charles II in 1663 to 8 proprietors, chief of whom were Clarendon and Ashley, and extended both to the north and to the south by a second charter granted in 1665. It was playing with the land, right? Playing with the land that did not belong to them, right? But that's why I said this is a story for a whole nother video. We're gonna cover it a whole nother video. This right here, I had a memoir from a Scottish-Irish family that settled in South Carolina in the 1700s. Now, we're not going to go into the memoir because it goes hand in hand with that other book. But it lets us know that the Scots fled here for the same reason that the Huguenots fled to the Americas. They all were fleeing some type of oppression and hardship due to what they believed in, right? Solely because of their religious choice, right? It was either get down or lay down, right? See, it says the family, they joined several thousands of immigrants from Ireland who settled in South Carolina in the 1730s. The family was Scots-Irish. They were among thousands of the Scottish Presbyterians who fled economic hardship in Scotland several decades earlier. Right? They packed up and they came to South Carolina. The family took an enticing package offered to the Scots by the English governor of South Carolina: land, money, tools, and provisions for a year to settle in the back country. Right, like I said, the same Huguenots who settled over here, they were all settling in the back countries. Right, just to give y'all understanding, what is South Carolina back country? It's defined as the area that is 50 miles inland all the way to the mountains, and it was practically unsettled by European Americans until the middle of the 18th century. And then the Low Country is the southeasternmost area of the state, comprising of 12 counties. So the same Huguenots, or quote-unquote Melungeons, that they say weren't there until the 18th century, which is true. They were there long before that, though, but these were the ones that were getting sort of kind of close to the Appalachian Mountains, right, in South Carolina, but going towards the mountains. And the ones settled in the Low Country, that brand of Huguenots, these were the ones that were also known as the Croatan, or those who were mixing in with the tribes along the coast, giving us the term French Indian, right, or African American, or Negro, or black man, right? You have these two colored people, one swarthy, one chestnut, right? They're gonna make more colored people, more colored babies. But yeah, they gonna tell y'all that South Carolina got African communities, right? We haven't went over an African yet that has been there so far from the 15 to the 1600s. It was only Indians and these settlers fleeing to the Americas. Right? That's just to understand that within a nutshell, right? Peep. Port Royal is a Huguenot settlement. Listen to what they about to say. This is from the book Indians of South Carolina that we covered in the last one. The Indians of Port Royal had contacts even further west into the south. In 1580, Menendez Marquez was still trying to track down the last French survivors of the 1577 shipwreck, and he learned that some of them were west of the Appalachian Mountains. In a letter from Santa Elena, he says that the Indians, because of the fear they have, offered to deliver to me, and so they went to seek them, and brought me the captain who was on the other side of the mountain ridge, 120 leagues from here. This implies that the coastal tribes were able to travel safely among the Cherokee. Now, disregard that. That's very important. Shout out to mound builders. But they've been shipwrecking in the Americas and mixing in with the people. 1577. This is comparable to the Croatan shipwreck. Right, when the I think if it's the English were trying to make their attempts to establish a colony. People just kept shipwrecking and were left to live with the Indians. And they started mixing in. Why is this important? Because this is where we get terms like the brass ankles peoples. Right? Mixed race peoples that have been here for hundreds of years. Since the 1500s. Right? And they're going to say they are a mixture of African, Native American, and European. We will deny that to the core. The African part for sure. But the Indian, European, there's something that we can't deny. Because what else are you going to do? It's 1577. Right? They friendly enough to not kill you. So if you're shipwrecked, you have to survive. You're going to seek your closest source of survival. And if people you are offering you a chance to survive, you're going to take it. Again, this is where we get terms like French Indians. Or why when the French came over here, there were already people there who understood French. Or there were different people who can translate. Because these folks been dwelling amongst them for years. But this is where you get stuff like the brass ankle settlement. I mean, the brass ankles peoples. Right? And they think it is so funny too, because you would get clowned for being a brass ankle. Check this. In search of the Black Dutch, ancestry of the Mesti, mixed blood, groups of my ancestors. Oh, that's an established article. Okay. But yeah, this is where you get brass ankles from. Right? These mixed peoples. They were a group who lived in the area of Orangeburg County, Berkeley County, and Charleston County from the early 1800s to the mid 1900s. Right? This is the same thing. This is the earliest saying that, you know, because the Melungeon wasn't the thing at the time. But this is an earlier, much later term for a Melungeon. A brass ankle. A brass ankle. So yeah, man, like South Carolina's history is very, very, very important. Like understanding the ancestry stuff and the whole we were here before the whole African slave trade stuff. To understand that, you have to understand the history of South Carolina. Like you can't go over the history of South Carolina I mean, you can't explain the Aboriginal European connection without understanding the history of South Carolina. You won't be able to understand true ancestry and true history in America without understanding what was going on in South Carolina. You won't understand true history, furthermore, without understanding what was going on in France, Ireland, Great Britain, Spain. You wouldn't understand true history if you didn't know what was going on over there at the time, right? Because if you ask someone today, well, what's the origins of the slave trade story that you heard? They're gonna tell you that Europeans picked up Africans from West Africa, came over here, dropped them off, and enslaved them. That's the most that they could tell you, right? Probably mention the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and maybe a few other boats and some other things, but they would never be able to explain or be able to break down the political situation and the religious situation in Europe at the time, because that's where it truly all stems from. This does not stem from picking up slaves in West Africa. That was much later, and they used that for labor, right? Just for more money, because obviously it's not working as much as it should here in America, right? They're fighting back. They're rebelling entirely too much, right? The only people that will not rebel as much for that land, well, we're going to have to go get people from another place. Just like we learned, and if you've been following my channel for a good amount of time, for I say about a year now, I did a video on the Caribs of the Caribbean islands, and they said, and the author said in the book, that the black Caribs refused to die, or refused to give up their land, and would die for that land before giving it up. This is the 1700s. So if they were African, why feel like that over a small island? Right? We got to understand, like, who this land belongs to. Them people. And yeah, like I said, just understanding what was going on in Europe, why these people came over here, what they did when they came over here, and whose land were they on. Like let's understand whose land were they on. Whose land did they come to? What was happening with those people? Right? You got to understand all of that stuff, because we can't just prance about dancing around looking like clowns saying, yep, I'm African. Right? We got African ancestry, but you don't understand half of American history, right? You don't even understand American history. And American history was founded and created and established off this stuff. And that's why it's important. Ladies and gents, I hope y'all appreciate this one, man. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Beyond appreciation, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. I hope it educated you to some certain extent. And just trust and believe that every time we get behind this microphone, I may not have the most perfect verbiage, right? Sometimes I may get a little tongue-tied, lost my words a little bit. But we're going to get the point across. Right, we're gonna spit facts every single time, and we getting it from great resources. If you want resources like these, make sure you hit me on Instagram, follow on all social media platforms. I will have the membership busting real soon up here on YouTube, where you could just subscribe to the membership, and all of these resources will be provided to you for free. So yeah, man. Oh yeah, and check out the coloring books too. Check out the coloring books. We got our first short story out, the Queen Khalifa story. Go check it out, man. I really enjoyed doing this. I'm not gonna stop, and as long as I got a brain, I'm gonna do me some research. All right. Again, appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay in tune for the next one. Let's get it.